The sun was shining brightly as we touched down in Bali, the warm breeze greeting us as we stepped off the plane. Megan smiled, wide-eyed at the beautiful landscape, but something about her felt different. I couldn't quite place it, but for the last few weeks, I had sensed a distance growing between us. We were supposed to be here to rekindle our relationship, to escape from the monotony of everyday life and find our spark again. But from the moment we landed, a weight had settled on my chest. It started subtly. Megan had always been attached to her phone, but now it felt constant. Whether we were walking along the beach or having breakfast at the resort, her eyes were always glued to the screen. When I asked her about it, she would brush it off with vague answers, work emails, she'd say, or checking in with friends back home. I wanted to believe her, but the uneasy feeling gnawed at me. The first real sign came on our second night. We had planned a quiet dinner by the beach. The setup was perfect, the sound of waves crashing against the shore, candles flickering in the breeze, and a sky full of stars above us. But just as our drinks arrived, Megan excused herself to take a phone call. She stepped away from the table, her voice hushed, moving further down the beach until I could barely see her. I watched her silhouette, phone pressed to her ear, her free hand gesturing as if she were in a deep conversation. 5 minutes passed, then 10. By the time she returned, her mood had shifted. She smiled, but it felt forced. "Work stuff," she muttered before quickly changing the subject. Something wasn't right. The next morning, Megan claimed she had booked a spa day for herself. "Just a few hours," she said, leaning in to kiss me on the cheek. "Why don't you relax by the pool? Maybe read a book. I'll be back by lunch." Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it, but the phone call from last night and her sudden need for alone time set off alarm bells in my head. I nodded, pretending everything was fine, but as soon as she left the room, I followed her. I don't know what I was expecting, but I needed answers. I trailed her from a distance, careful to keep out of sight. Instead of heading to the spa, Megan walked through the bustling market square, her pace quickening as she navigated the narrow streets. My heart raced as I stayed a few steps behind, weaving through the crowd. She didn't notice me, her eyes were fixed ahead, focused. After about 10 minutes of walking, she stopped at a small cafe on a quiet corner. I ducked behind a street vendor, watching as she scanned the area. They greeted each other with familiarity, a kiss on the cheek, followed by easy laughter as they sat down at a table. I stood frozen, hidden in the shadows, unable to believe what I was seeing. This wasn't just a colleague. This wasn't just a friend. The way they leaned in close, the way their hands brushed casually, it was clear this was something more. My world shifted in that moment, the suspicions I had tried to bury now glaringly obvious. For a while, I just stood there, watching them from afar. A part of me wanted to march over, demand answers, but I held back. There was something about the way Megan smiled at him, something I hadn't seen in a long time. A carefree, genuine happiness that cut deeper than any words could. They talked for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 20 minutes. I stayed in place, my mind reeling, the pieces falling into place. Every unexplained absence, every mysterious text, every excuse, it all made sense now. Our vacation wasn't about us. It was about him. I wasn't the reason she wanted to escape to paradise. He was. I felt sick, my pulse pounding in my ears as I finally pulled myself away from the scene. I needed space to think, to figure out what to do next. I stumbled back to the hotel, avoiding the pool where couples were lounging in the sun, unaware of the storm brewing inside me. When I returned to our room, I paced back and forth, trying to calm my racing thoughts. What should I do? Should I confront her right away? Should I pack my bags and leave? My heart told me to act, to do something, anything, but my mind was pulling me in a different direction. This wasn't just about anger, it was about betrayal. I needed to understand how deep it went before I made my move. By the time Megan returned, I had calmed myself down, but barely. She entered the room with the same smile she always wore, acting like nothing had happened. I played along, though every word felt like a lie. We had lunch together, we swam in the pool, we even shared a drink at the bar that night. But in my mind, all I could see was her and that man, laughing together at that cafe while I sat in the dark, unknowingly betrayed. I went to bed that night, staring at the ceiling, know one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Megan had no idea that I knew, but that gave me the advantage. She had made her move, and now it was my turn. The only question was, how far was I willing to go? The next morning, Megan was back to her usual self, humming softly as she brushed her hair and got ready for breakfast. It was almost as if she hadn't met another man yesterday, almost as if the weight of her betrayal didn't exist. But I knew better now. My stomach churned as I watched her from the bed, pretending to scroll through my phone, but my thoughts were elsewhere. I had followed her the day before, seen her with that man, and now I couldn't unsee it. Their laughter, their closeness, it replayed in my mind like a broken record. It took everything I had not to confront her on the spot, but I knew I needed more. I had to be sure. "I'll be down in a minute, okay?" she said, her smile perfectly in place. "Sure, take your time," I replied, my voice steady. Inside, I was anything but calm. I waited until she left the room, then got up and headed straight for her phone. I had never snooped through her things before, but this wasn't the time for restraint. I knew her phone password. It was the same one she'd used for years, and within seconds, I was in. I didn't know what I was expecting. Maybe some incriminating texts, or a flirty message. But what I found was something much worse. Nothing. There were no texts, no recent calls, nothing suspicious in her apps. It was as if the slate had been wiped clean. For a moment, I wondered if I had imagined it all. Maybe the cafe meeting wasn't what I thought it was. But then I remembered the way she had kissed him on the cheek, the way her body language spoke volumes. No, she was hiding something, and she was doing it well. I needed a new plan. As we ate breakfast together, I watched her carefully. Megan was animated, talking about all the things we could do today: visit the temples, go snorkeling, maybe even check out the local shops. She was acting like a perfect wife, like nothing was wrong, and I hated it. Every smile, every laugh felt like another layer of her deception. But I played along. "That sounds great," I said, nodding. Inside, I felt like a puppet, every word a performance. My mind was elsewhere, already plotting my next move. Following her once had given me a glimpse of the truth, but I needed more. I needed something concrete, something she couldn't deny. When she suggested another solo spa day for herself later that afternoon, I didn't hesitate to agree. "You should definitely go," I said, trying to hide the bitterness in my voice. "It'll be good for you." She smiled brightly, maybe even a little too brightly. "Thanks, babe. You're the best," she said, leaning in to kiss me before heading off. And just like that, she was gone. As soon as she left, I got dressed quickly and followed her again. This time, I knew what to expect, and I wasn't going to let her out of my sight. I stayed a safe distance behind, weaving through the streets as she made her way past the resort, just like before. But instead of heading to the spa, she went straight to the cafe. I ducked into a nearby alley, my heart pounding as I watched her sit at the same table. And then, right on cue, he arrived. Steve, the man I had seen the day before. Tall, tanned, confident. They greeted each other like old friends, but there was something more. Their conversation was light, full of smiles and laughter, but the way they touched, the way their hands lingered, it made my stomach turn. This wasn't just a casual meeting. I strained to hear their conversation, but from where I stood, I could only catch snippets. It didn't matter, though. The way they looked at each other said everything. They were comfortable, too comfortable. And then it hit me: their relationship wasn't new. This affair had been going on for a while. I had been blind to it, too trusting to see the signs. Steve reached across the table, placing his hand on hers. Megan didn't pull away. Instead, she smiled, leaning in closer, whispering something that made him laugh. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of betrayal and fury coursing through my veins. I had seen enough. I turned and walked away, unable to watch any longer. It felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. This vacation, the one that was supposed to save our relationship, was nothing but a cover for her affair. How long had this been going on? Had she planned this whole trip just to be with him? Back at the hotel, I paced the room, my mind racing. Every moment of our relationship flashed before my eyes: every kiss, every shared memory, every time she had told me she loved me. How much of it had been a lie? How much of it had been a mask to hide the truth? I sat down on the edge of the bed, trying to calm myself. Confronting her right now wouldn't fix anything. I needed to think, to figure out what to do next. Megan wasn't just cheating, she was manipulating me, playing me for a fool. But not anymore. This time, I had the upper hand. As I stared out the window at the tropical paradise that suddenly felt like a prison, one thing became clear. Megan had made her move. Now, it was time for me to make mine. The moment I walked back into the hotel room, a plan began to form in my mind. Megan thought she could carry on with her secret, flaunting her betrayal while pretending everything was normal. Well, two could play that game. If she was going to use this vacation as a backdrop for her affair, then I'd use it for something else. Revenge? Confronting her wasn't enough. Yelling or accusing her in the heat of the moment wouldn't give me the satisfaction I craved. No, I wanted her to feel exactly what I felt, to experience the crushing weight of betrayal. I wanted her to hurt, not with words, but with actions. If she could find solace in someone else, so could I. That evening, I went through the motions as though nothing had changed. Megan came back from her supposed spa day with the same cheerful demeanor, talking about how relaxing it had been. I nodded along, pretending to listen, but my mind was elsewhere. I had already decided on my next move. Tomorrow, I would put my plan into action. The next morning, Megan suggested we go snorkeling, but I told her I wasn't feeling well. "You go ahead, enjoy yourself," I said, waving her off. I needed time alone to set things up. As soon as she left, I headed down to the hotel bar. If I was going to start my plan, I needed to find someone who could help me execute it. Someone who would make Megan feel the sting of her own actions. That's when I met Stephanie. She was sitting at the bar, sipping a drink and flipping through a magazine. She looked up as I sat down next to her, flashing a warm smile. "Here on vacation?" she asked casually, her Australian accent soft and inviting. "Yeah," I replied, my mind already working, trying to unwind a bit. "How about you?" We talked for a while, the conversation easy and light. I found myself smiling despite everything, grateful for the distraction. Stephanie was young, confident, and beautiful, exactly what I needed. And most importantly, she was single. We hit it off quickly, and it wasn't long before I laid out the situation for her, though I kept the details vague. "My wife, she's been seeing someone else," I explained, swirling the ice in my drink. "I figured if she can have her fun, maybe I should too." Stephanie's eyes sparkled with a mischievous glint. "So, what's your plan?" she asked, leaning in. I glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "I want to make sure she knows. I want her to see what it feels like." Stephanie chuckled, a slow smile spreading across her face. "I like the way you think." That was all I needed. We spent the rest of the day together, walking along the beach, laughing, and getting to know each other. But all the while, my focus was on Megan, how she would react when she saw me with another woman. I imagined the shock, the anger, the humiliation. It fueled me, pushed me forward. That evening, I made sure Megan would see us. Stephanie and I went to a restaurant I knew Megan liked. I had overheard her mention earlier that she wanted to go there for dinner with Steve. It was perfect. We arrived first, settling into a cozy corner booth, deliberately in the open, where we could easily be seen. I wasn't nervous. I wanted Megan to walk in and find us, to feel her world crumble the way mine had when I saw her with Steve. We didn't have to wait long. Megan and Steve arrived about 20 minutes later, holding hands as they entered the restaurant. They hadn't even spotted us yet. I could see the contentment on her face, the way she leaned into him. My stomach churned, but I kept my cool, focusing on what was about to unfold. Stephanie leaned in closer to me, her arm casually draped around my shoulder as we talked and laughed. I made sure we looked like the perfect couple, just like Megan and Steve. And then it happened. Megan turned and saw us. Her expression shifted instantly from casual contentment to pure shock. Her eyes locked onto me, and for a moment, she froze. I met her gaze, holding it. I wanted her to know this wasn't an accident. This was intentional. She let go of Steve's hand and stormed over to our table, her face a mix of confusion and fury. "Alex, what the hell is going on here?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut through the restaurant's background noise. Steve hung back awkwardly, watching the scene unfold. I looked up at her, calm and collected. Just having dinner, Megan, I said, my voice icy. Same as you, I assume. Her eyes flicked between me and Stephanie, struggling to find the words. Who is this? This is Stephanie, I said, leaning back in my chair, crossing my arms. We've been spending some time together. You know, like how you've been spending time with Steve. Megan's face went pale, and her mouth dropped open. How did you? She stammered, her eyes widening as the realization hit her. I know everything, Megan, I said, my voice low but firm. I saw you with him. I know about the lies, the meetings, all of it. Her face flushed, her anger quickly replaced by panic. She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off. And now you know what it feels like, don't you? To be betrayed, to be replaced. Stephanie sat quietly beside me, watching the scene with an amused smile. Megan glanced at Steve, who stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Her eyes filled with a mix of anger and shame. She had been caught, and there was no way out. Without another word, I stood up, tossing some cash on the table. Enjoy your dinner, I said coldly before walking out with Stephanie. Megan stood there, speechless, as the weight of my revenge sank in. The restaurant door closed behind me, and the noise of the evening crowds faded into the background as I stepped into the humid Bali air. I felt a strange sense of relief, but also a heavy emptiness in my chest. I had imagined this moment for days. Megan's shocked face, her stunned silence, but now that it had happened, the satisfaction I expected wasn't quite there. Stephanie walked beside me, quiet but aware that something deeper was unfolding within me. She had played her part perfectly, and now that the scene was over, it felt like her role had ended too. We reached the hotel, and I turned to her, unsure what to say. You okay? She asked, her voice softer than before, her mischievous grin replaced by concern. I nodded, but it was more reflex than truth. Yeah, I need a minute. Stephanie understood. I get it. Look, if you need anything, I'll be around. But I'll give you some space, she said, offering a supportive smile before heading off to her room. I stood alone in the hallway for a moment, staring at the door to my own suite. Megan was still at the restaurant with Steve, and I knew she would be back sooner or later, but I wasn't ready for that confrontation yet. I walked out to the hotel's private beach, the waves gently crashing against the shore, and sat down on the cool sand. I had wanted revenge, and I got it. Megan had seen me with another woman, and the look on her face when I revealed that I knew about her affair was exactly what I had imagined. But now that it was done, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. The truth of what had just happened, the complete disintegration of my marriage, was settling in, and it wasn't as satisfying as I had hoped. My thoughts swirled as I stared out at the ocean. The night breeze was cool, and the stars above were clear and bright, but all I could think about was how my life had been shattered. Megan had betrayed me, and I had wanted her to feel the pain I felt. But what did it solve? We were both left with nothing but the ruins of our relationship. An hour must have passed before I finally went back to the room. As I entered, I wasn't surprised to find Megan sitting on the edge of the bed, her eyes red and puffy. She had been crying, her makeup smudged from what had undoubtedly been a long, tearful walk back from the restaurant. For a moment, we just stared at each other in silence. There were no more lies to cover up, no more excuses she could offer. It was all laid bare now. I'm sorry, she whispered, breaking the silence, her voice cracking. I felt the anger flare up again, but this time it was tinged with exhaustion. Sorry? For what, Megan? For lying to me? For sneaking around behind my back? I could hear the bitterness in my voice, but I didn't care. Or for getting caught? She winced at that, wiping her face with the back of her hand. I never wanted it to get this far, she said softly. It just happened. I shook my head, pacing the room, trying to keep my composure. Don't give me that. You don't accidentally have an affair, Megan. You made a choice. And you kept making that choice over and over again. Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time, she looked truly defeated. You're right. I made a mistake. A terrible one. But I didn't want to lose you, Alex. I don't know what I was thinking. You weren't thinking, I snapped. You were too busy lying and sneaking around with him. She flinched again, tears welling up in her eyes. Please, Alex. I know I messed up, but I love you. I still love you. Can't we? Can't we try to fix this? Her words hung in the air, but they didn't move me. Love? After everything? After the lies, the betrayal, the pain? I didn't even know what love looked like anymore. What I knew was that Megan had broken something in me that couldn't be repaired. I turned away from her, walking to the balcony. The air outside was cool, but it didn't ease the fire burning inside me. I don't think there's anything left to fix, I said, my voice low but firm. You broke us. You broke me. She sobbed softly behind me, but I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see her tears, didn't want to feel any sympathy. This was her doing, not mine. A long silence passed before she finally spoke again. What now? Her voice was fragile, filled with fear. I took a deep breath, still staring out at the waves. I don't know, I said honestly. But I do know one thing: we're not going back to the way things were. Not ever. Megan didn't say anything. Maybe she knew, deep down, that the damage was too great, that we had crossed a line, and there was no way to return. I stayed on the balcony for a while, listening to the waves, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. When I finally went back inside, Megan was lying on the bed, curled up with her back to me, her quiet sobs fading into the silence of the night. I lay down on the other side of the bed, the space between us feeling wider than ever. The aftermath of everything we had built lay scattered in pieces, and the one thing I knew for sure was that nothing would ever be the same again. By the time we returned from Bali, the tension between Megan and me was palpable. The vacation that was supposed to mend our marriage had shattered it beyond repair, and there was no going back. The flight home was silent. She sat by the window, staring out at the clouds, while I brooded in the aisle seat, barely able to look at her. I could still hear her desperate pleas from our confrontation back at the hotel. She wanted to fix things, to rebuild what we had, but I wasn't interested. That part of me, the part that believed we could work through this, was gone. Now, all I felt was a burning need for retribution. Once we landed and got back to our house, I barely spoke to Megan. I could see she was trying to reach out, to bridge the gap, but every word from her mouth sounded hollow. Her apologies were meaningless now. My mind was already spinning with the next phase of my revenge, taking apart the life we had built together, piece by piece, just like she had taken apart our marriage. I knew Megan still thought she could salvage this, that we could somehow recover, but I had other plans. While she tried to get back to her normal routine, going to work, meeting friends, pretending nothing had changed, I was already laying the groundwork for my exit. And I was going to make sure that when I left, I didn't leave her with anything. The first step was the finances. I had always been the one to manage our money, a fact that now worked entirely in my favor. I started small, quietly draining our joint bank accounts, transferring the money into my personal accounts. Megan wouldn't notice right away. She rarely checked the balance unless something urgent came up. Next, I went after the things she valued the most. Megan had a collection of expensive designer handbags, jewelry, and clothes items she had worked hard to buy and loved showing off to her friends. One afternoon, when she was at work, I went through her closet, carefully packing up her prized possessions. The next day, I sold them all to a high-end consignment shop, pocketing the cash. Every step I took felt like reclaiming control. She had cheated on me, lied to me, and now she would lose the comforts she had grown so used to. I was going to strip her of everything she held dear. I even sabotaged our home. While Megan was out, I began making subtle but devastating changes. I canceled some of the utilities under her name. She'd come home to find the cable disconnected or the water turned off. I also withdrew large sums of money from our savings, leaving just enough so she wouldn't immediately notice, but ensuring that when the time came, she'd be left with nothing substantial. At first, Megan didn't seem to realize what was happening. She was too caught up in trying to make amends, too focused on salvaging what was already beyond repair. But after a few days, I saw the confusion begin to settle in. She came home one evening, frowning as she rummaged through the kitchen drawers. "Alex, did you notice that the internet isn't working? And why are some of my clothes missing from the closet?" she asked, her voice strained, the first hint of unease creeping in. I shrugged, barely looking up from my phone. "No idea. Maybe check with the cable company," I said casually, savoring the way her frustration simmered just beneath the surface. I watched as the reality of what was happening slowly dawned on her over the next few days. She tried calling the bank one afternoon, only to find that our accounts were nearly empty. Her confusion turned to panic, but by then it was too late. "Alex, what's going on?" she demanded one evening, her voice trembling as she held up her phone, showing me the bank statement. "Where's all the money? And why is everything falling apart around here?" I looked at her, the coldness in my chest now a familiar companion. "I'm taking what's mine," I said flatly. "You took everything that mattered from me, Megan. So now I'm returning the favor." Her face paled, her hands shaking as she lowered the phone. What are you talking about?" she stammered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know about you and Steve," I said, my voice as steady as stone. "I know everything. You destroyed us. So now I'm destroying what's left." Her eyes widened with shock and horror, but I didn't flinch. She began to cry, her tears falling silently at first, and then louder as the sobs came. "I thought we could fix this," she whispered through her tears. I thought you loved me." I stood there, unmoved by her breakdown. "Love?" I repeated, laughing bitterly. "You think this is love? You threw that away the moment you decided to sneak around behind my back. There's nothing left to fix, Megan. You made sure of that." She collapsed onto the couch, her face buried in her hands, the sobs shaking her body. But I didn't feel any sympathy. This was what she deserved. She had lied, cheated, and now she would pay the price for her betrayal. I had already made arrangements for my final move. My lawyer had prepared the paperwork for the divorce, and I had lined up a new place to live, far from here. I'd be gone by the end of the week, and when I left, Megan would be left with the wreckage of everything we had built together. The thought brought me a grim satisfaction. She had betrayed me, and now she would feel what it was like to be utterly alone. It was the morning of my departure. The house was still and quiet, the air heavy with the weight of everything that had happened over the last few weeks. The end was finally here. Megan was at work, oblivious to what awaited her when she came home. I had packed my things, what little I intended to take, and left them by the door, ready to leave this chapter of my life behind for good. But before I walked out of this house, I had one final task. I sat at the kitchen table, pen in hand, staring at the blank sheet of paper in front of me. Writing this letter was harder than I thought it would be, but it was necessary. I needed Megan to know exactly how her betrayal had led us to this point, and how carefully I had planned my revenge. I took a deep breath and began to write. "Megan, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I've taken what's mine, and I've left you with what you deserve, nothing. You thought I didn't know, didn't you? You thought you could continue seeing Steve behind my back, playing the role of the perfect wife while betraying me with every smile, every kiss. But I knew. I've known for a while. I saw the signs, the late nights, the secretive phone calls, the way you pulled away from me more and more. And when I followed you in Bali, I saw everything. I watched you meet him, laughing like you didn't have a care in the world, while I sat there like a fool. That was the moment everything changed for me. That was the moment I realized the woman I had loved for years was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. You killed our marriage, Megan, and now you'll live with the consequences. While you were busy with your lies, I was busy with my own plans. I emptied our bank accounts, sold your precious things, and I've left you with nothing but the wreckage of what we once had. I wanted you to feel the same pain I felt, the same loss, the same emptiness. And now, you will. Do you remember when you asked me if we could fix this? If we could go back to the way things were? You asked if I still loved you, and the truth is, I don't know if I ever will again. You broke something in me that can't be repaired. You destroyed the trust, the bond we had, and there's no coming back from that. By the time you get home, I'll be gone. Don't bother trying to find me. I've made sure I've disappeared from your life completely. You'll have to pick up the pieces on your own. Goodbye, Megan. I hope one day you realize that you didn't just lose me. You lost the life we built, the comfort, the security. You lost everything. And you have no one to blame but yourself. Alex. I set the pen down and folded the letter carefully, placing it on the kitchen table where I knew she'd find it. As I looked around the house one last time, I couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of sadness and satisfaction. This place, this life, was filled with memories, some good, some bad, but none of that mattered anymore. It was over. I walked through the house, room by room, letting each space settle into the past. The living room where we had spent countless nights together, the kitchen where we shared meals, and finally, our bedroom. The bed we had once shared now felt like a stranger's bed to me. It was no longer a place of comfort, but a reminder of the lies Megan had spun. I stood in front of the mirror for a moment, looking at my reflection, trying to recognize the man staring back at me. I wasn't the same person I had been before this trip. The Alex who had arrived in Bali with hopes of fixing his marriage was gone. The man standing here now was someone new, someone who had learned the hard way that trust, once broken, couldn't be repaired. With that final thought, I grabbed my bags and walked out the front door. I didn't look back. There was no point. Everything behind me was in ruins, and my future was waiting somewhere far away from this place. I drove for hours, letting the miles between me and that house pile up. The further I went, the lighter I felt. I hadn't realized how heavy the burden of betrayal had been until I started to leave it all behind. By the time I reached the edge of town, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: freedom. My phone buzzed a few times in the passenger seat. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Megan, no doubt, trying to reach me, trying to understand what had happened. But I wasn't interested in explanations anymore. The letter said it all, and besides, there was nothing left to say. I had one final stop to make before I left this place for good: the lawyer's office. I pulled into the parking lot, grabbed the divorce papers from the back seat, and walked inside. My attorney had been efficient, preparing everything I needed to sever the last remaining ties to Megan. I signed the papers without hesitation, feeling a strange sense of closure as I did. The clerk at the front desk smiled politely as I handed over the documents. "All done?" she asked, her tone cheerful. I nodded. All done. As I walked out of the office, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was over. The marriage, the lies, the revenge, all of it was behind me now. The road stretched out ahead of me, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel trapped. I felt free. I started the car and drove into my new future, leaving the past behind. The sun was setting as I drove into a new town, the orange glow casting long shadows across the empty road. It felt fitting leaving behind one life as the day ended and stepping into a new one as night approached. I hadn't planned where I was going. I just kept driving, letting the miles between Megan and me grow until the past felt like a distant memory. The freedom I felt was liberating, but it also came with a strange emptiness. Everything I'd known for the past 10 years had crumbled, leaving me with only the fragments of what I used to be. After hours on the road, I finally stopped at a small, quiet town nestled between the mountains and the sea. It was the kind of place where no one would ask questions, where I could be whoever I wanted to be. A fresh start. A new beginning. I found a small motel on the edge of town, its neon sign flickering as I pulled into the gravel parking lot. The clerk barely glanced at me as I checked in, handing me a key without a word. That's what I needed: anonymity. The room was simple: just a bed, a desk, and a window overlooking the road, but it felt like a sanctuary. I tossed my bags on the floor and collapsed onto the bed, the exhaustion of the past weeks finally catching up with me. The silence was deafening. There were no more lies, no more betrayals, no more games. Just me and the quiet. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to reflect on everything that had happened. Megan's betrayal, my revenge, the way our marriage had unraveled in such a spectacular fashion. I had done everything I set out to do. I had made her feel the pain I felt, stripped her of the life she thought she could have, and left her with nothing. Yet here I was, feeling hollow. The satisfaction I had craved didn't fill the void inside me. I sat up, glancing at my phone on the nightstand. It had been buzzing all day: calls, texts, all from Megan. She had probably read the letter by now, trying to piece together how everything had gone so wrong. I hadn't responded, and I wasn't planning to. That chapter of my life was closed. Still, a part of me couldn't help but wonder what she was feeling. Anger? Regret? Pain? I picked up the phone, staring at the screen. Her last message flashed up: "Alex, please? Can we talk?" The words hung there, begging for a response. But I knew there was nothing left to say. Talking wouldn't undo what had been done. Talking wouldn't heal the wounds we'd both inflicted on each other. With a sigh, I turned the phone off and tossed it onto the bed. Megan was a part of my past now, and I wasn't going to let her drag me back into that mess. I had a new life to focus on. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of seagulls calling outside my window. The air was crisp, the scent of salt water heavy in the breeze. It was a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere I had left behind. I spent the day wandering around the town, getting to know the place that would be my new home. There was a small diner on Main Street, a general store, and a marina where the locals docked their boats. It was quiet, peaceful, the perfect place to start over. As I walked along the pier, watching the boats bob gently in the water, I realized that I didn't know what came next. For so long, my life had been about Megan, about our marriage, and then about my revenge. Now that it was all behind me, I had no plan, no direction. But maybe that was okay. Maybe for the first time in a long time, I didn't need a plan. I could just be. That evening, I found myself sitting at a small bar near the waterfront, a cold beer in hand as I watched the sun dip below the horizon. The bartender, a middle-aged man with graying hair, struck up a conversation. His questions were simple: where are you from? What brings you here? But I gave vague answers. I wasn't ready to talk about my past. Not yet. Maybe not ever. You here for a fresh start? He asked, wiping down the counter as he poured another drink. I nodded, taking a sip of my beer. Something like that. He smiled, nodding knowingly. You'd be surprised how many people come through here looking for the same thing. This town has a way of giving people a second chance. A second chance. That's what I needed. A second chance to figure out who I was without the weight of betrayal on my shoulders, without the constant reminder of what had gone wrong. The next few days passed in a blur. I settled into a routine, finding small joys in the quiet moments of my new life. I bought a notebook from the general store, starting to write down my thoughts, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. It felt cathartic, putting it all on paper, as though by writing it down, I could leave it behind. One afternoon, I came across a photo from our vacation in Bali, the two of us standing on the beach, smiling as if we didn't have a care in the world. I stared at it for a long time, feeling a pang of sadness for the man I used to be, for the life I thought we had. But that life was gone now, and so was the version of me who had lived it. I folded the photo and tucked it away in my notebook, a reminder of what I had left behind. As the days turned into weeks, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild. That this new life, this fresh start, could be more than just an escape from the past. It could be a beginning. My beginning. I wasn't the same man I had been before. And that was okay. I didn't need to be. All that mattered now was the road ahead, and for the first time, I was ready to walk it one step at a time.